using my third system of mics and hearing, and it's basically the same one that I used last semester. And this has basically been the story here at the college. I've had way more learning curves in the last 5 months than I care to ever have in any career, and I'm only using about 30% of the learning curves. We learn this, oh, so that doesn't work. We learn that, oh, that doesn't work. Well, now I'm going back to the original. I'm hoping by Thursday I will have Bluetooth headphones and mics so that I can hear your questions and you can hear me really clear. But what happened yesterday is I'm messing with all this. I forgot to turn on the record because Zoom also changed this series of buttons to record. It won't change things, man. We got learning curves up the ass. Can you just calm down and keep it the same? Well, those students yesterday who did not engage, I don't have a recording for them. So always come to class as if you're live and engaged, because you cannot trust that you'll have a recording. In fact, this is the only lecture I'm going to record for you. This was also covered in the orientation meeting. If you did not view that, you need to, because there's a lot of key information there. And as I said in the Canvas announcement, you should include the content in the orientation PowerPoint as part of your syllabus. All right, let's go over the documents that are found on the Canvas site under syllabus. I usually have hard copies to give out here in the class on the first day of class. But hopefully you either printed them up or at least can see them on the screen. You have 3 documents there under syllabus, and that is the course syllabus, and all 3 are basically part of the syllabus. But I separated out so that it's a little bit simpler for you. The syllabus has the course policies, and that's what you want to add the PowerPoint, the orientation PowerPoint to. And then you have a lecture schedule and your lab schedule. Let's look at the course syllabus first. First of all, because this class is meant and designed to be live, I included the whole syllabus of previous live semesters. And then in red, I added new policies that are specific to ERT. For those policies that only apply to when you're actually live here on campus, there's a strike through. You could still read the words, but you know that they don't apply to you because you're not on campus. Does this make sense? So make sure you read it. I'm way too tired to go over it. You just got to read it. But I wanted you to see the full course syllabus, and that's why even the policies about when you're on campus live are still there. You just got to strike through it. But everything that's red, definitely pay attention to, because those are specific to ERT. Okay. On the last page, it talks about the required textbooks. You need a McKinley Human Anatomy textbook. It actually has come out with the 6th edition. But you can use any of them. This is the 5th edition. The 6th edition I have is loose leaf, so I don't have it in a binder, so I didn't bring it. But you don't have to get the most current edition. You just want to get the edition that is least expensive. And I have the whole course materials usable from the 2nd edition all the way to the current 6th edition. And just find the cheapest one. Not one is going to be better than the other. Just find the cheapest one. The only one that you can't use is the 1st edition. I don't know if you can even find any copies of that anymore, but the chapters are in a different order. So you just can't use the 1st edition. And you also need the laboratory objectives. I'll explain this more in lab. You need here.
This meeting is
again,
being recorded.
Stuff for lab. You don't need Scantrons or Blue Books. All the exams are going to be on Canvas, and that's also covered in the orientation of PowerPoint. All right, go ahead and look at your lecture schedule, and it's 2 pages. If you look at this carefully, you'll see that there are 4 lecture exams. And the lecture exam 4, the last one, is given during finals week. It is not cumulative. It is just covering the last quarter of the course. And because of that, on Canvas, I don't give you the full 2 hours. I give you the same amount of time as the other lecture exams because it's just like a lecture exam. And each are 100 points each. So if you toggle back and forth from the lecture exam to the last page of your syllabus, you will see that the 4 lecture exams is the majority of the points in the course. So that'd be 400. I'll write it here. Use a different color. And all of these are equally weighted. There's no different weighting of the points. In lab, you have a lab quiz. The first graded thing in week 3. What's that? Do you have a question? Again, make sure you're muted. So that then what you do is you unmute yourself to ask a question. And then when you're done with the question, remute yourself, okay? That'll be especially, if I can get the Bluetooth headphones working, that's gonna be really important because it'll be right in my ears. All right, so this is lecture. This first one with the dot is lecture. All the rest is lab. Lab quiz is 25 points, there's 5. Lab exams, that's your 675. And out of that 675, it's all percentages. So 89.5% is an A, 79.5% is a B, 69% even is your C cutoff line. If you're less than 59.5, then that's an F. Okay? Now what you also have to know here and look on the syllabus toward the very end, this is also covered actually just covered there at the end. Also, there's one thing I'll mention later about the final exam as well. Oh, it is mentioned on class policy number 8 on page 2 that in addition to total points, this grade scale here, and that's why I'll put a little asterisk here. You must pass a lecture exam, at least one lecture exam with a C or higher to pass the class. In other words, you cannot just pass the class without becoming proficient at taking lecture exams. And I explained this in the orientation meeting that if you're going into healthcare, you have made yourself a slave to tests. And even if you can pass all your classes with projects and extra credit, you can't work in the field you want to work with until you're proficient at taking tests. Tests to get into the program, like the TEAS tests, and then licensing exams, like state boards for dental hygienists and the NCLEX. So we don't do you any favors by allowing you to pass the class without really becoming proficient at taking tests. So there's an asterisk on this, in that you have to score at least one lecture exam at 69 or higher to get a C or higher in the course, regardless of points. Even if you have enough points for even a B, if you don't pass a lecture exam, the highest grade you can get is a D, okay? Make sure you understand that. policy number 8 on page 2, and there at the very end on page 3 at the bottom with the grade scales. All right? And then we'll go over the lab exams in lab. And this is the setup here. Here's my contact information. Lecture that we're starting right now is Tuesday and Thursday, both sections. And then lab 2169 CRN is today. And on Tuesdays, 1 to 4, and 2168 is Thursdays. It's weird how they reverse the order of the numbers, but that's, you make sure that you're very cognizant of when you have lab. Because again, I will also do the ads in lab today. So I have given some ad codes out because some classes I know I can fit everyone in. If I know that your position on the wait list is such that you get in, I'll give it to you now. But if not, ad codes are in lab. All right. Any questions on the syllabus and the lecture schedule? Any questions? All right. Let's, before we get on to talking about anatomy, let's just get real. Bio 124, human anatomy, and I've taught here for coming up on 16 years, has, if not the highest, attrition rate of any class on the college. And what you have to understand is that I've taken all these classes. That's what these letters mean. In fact, I'm the only one on the faculty of the science department that actually has health professional education. And that's why I teach a class the way I do, is because I know how they're run. I know what's going to be expected of you. I know how to think it. And that's why I teach it. And I teach these classes the way I would want it taught if I was a student in this class. And one of the things is that's going to really help you is learning to become disciplined, because that's actually what it takes to be a healthcare provider, to be a health professional. You have to be disciplined. In fact, that's what the term practice means, by the way. You know, how you practice medicine or practice dentistry or nurse practitioner, or you're practicing dental hygiene. The word practice means you're disciplined and you're constantly practicing to get better. And basically, this is because of what I know and because of what I've been through in school. I don't teach anatomy, not primarily. I use anatomy to teach you how to be a health science student. And you'll actually see it in this first lecture. That's a big difference. I use anatomy to teach you how to succeed in the health sciences, so that it's not just about passing this class and moving on. It's about being equipped so that all your future classes become easier. You think that's worthwhile? Or should I just teach anatomy? You know, just ride it through till retirement. I'm tenured. I don't have to worry. I could suck at teaching. You know, I'm not going to lose my job, especially because I have the highest seniority of anybody in the department. Would you rather have that? I just teach anatomy, just go to the course outline, just spit it at you, let you figure it out. What I do is I use anatomy to teach you how to be a student so that physiology is easier. And I see it every semester. In live classes, I have students write a 3x5 card, and one of the questions is what grade did you get in anatomy and who was your teacher? And I could just statistically graph it. Those that take me for anatomy have an on average higher grade in physiology. And it just goes on from there. Everything else just becomes easier. Okay, so some of the things that I'm going to teach you is, and I wrote some of the stuff here on the whiteboard. There's an announcement that came out as soon as I activated or published the Canvas pages. And it's a link to this online tutorial, Strategies for Success, that I had to put together for when I was directing the NIH grant here. And I would strongly recommend that you do it. In fact, that's the kind of stuff you want to do before the first class, because what you want to do is you want to start out on top of it, build up a grade cushion all semester, and coast at the end. Now, if you look back at the syllabus, page 2, class policy number 3 on the final exam. And it sounds like it's kind of funny for a class that has the highest attrition rate on campus. Final exam. The final exam is part of the course and must be taken. If you miss the final exam, you will be penalized 1 full grade for your final course grade. You know why that's in there? Because those students that learn how to be disciplined, or maybe they are already disciplined before they came to see me, but they will have enough points for an A before lecture exam 4. Us is just telling them, hey, you need this information for physiology, so don't think you can take the last quarter of the semester off. You have enough points for an A, congratulations, you kicked ass, finish the course. Everybody got it? It is doable. And I've had many students have enough points for an A before the final, okay? How do you do this? Are you guys paying attention? Good thing this is being recorded because I think I actually pressed the right buttons. Look over the semester, both schedules. And that's one of the things Strategies for Success tutorial tells you. Look at both schedules. Make a semester at a glance, one sheet of paper, your whole semester schedule. And you can put your lecture exams and your lab exams where they go on that calendar. The way you kick ass in this class is you make sure you pass lecture exam 2. It is the easiest of the 4 lecture exams. Lecture exam 1 is actually the easiest, but you guys are clueless as to how I take a test. And so when you're clueless about how a teacher takes a test, that adds some difficulty to it. Well, you're going to learn from lecture exam 1. Lecture exam 2 only has 2 organ systems, the skeletal system and the muscle system. In fact, if you look at the lecture schedule, you can see it. Osteology is bones, myology is muscles. That's it for lecture exam 2. Look on lecture exam 3. Nervous system, senses, endocrine system. The nervous system is intense. Lecture exam 3 is hard. Harder than lecture exam 2. Lecture exam 4, look what was on lecture exam 4. Cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system, and reproductive system. If you don't pay attention to this, you'll do it like a lot of students do at this college. They don't even really start trying till week 2. And already you're in a grade hole in that first lab quiz. And then you bomb lecture exam 1. And the way not to do classes like this is to start out with a huge grade hole and try to dig yourself up out of that hole all semester. That is just unpleasant pressure. That is not the way to do classes like this. The way to do classes like this is you start out intense, which means you actually start getting your shit together before week 1, like a week ago. You're already getting it together. You're saying, thank you for doing this orientation. Let me get my shit together before the classes even start. That's how you do these classes. Then you start out on the very first stage, just ready to kick ass. You're engaged, you're taking notes. You are, and I'm going to say this multiple times a semester, study each week as if I am testing you on it on the next Tuesday. That's not what students do here. They just wait and procrastinate and then cram. Classes like this have too much content to cram. You stay on top of it. You study week 1, this PowerPoint, like I'm testing you on it a week from today. It is a different type of discipline. It's a different type of study. That, I will cover later, is active learning. Just cruising until, oh, shoot, man, lecture exam 1 is, I got the weekend. You're screwed. Because it's too much to cram. And also, I'll teach you, and I'll tie it to neurology. Your short-term memory cannot hold that much information. You need to, starting from this week, be converting short-term memory to long-term memory. And that takes repetitions. You do that, if you study each week, like I'm testing on it the following Tuesday, when you come to lecture exam 1, you're ready and you're going to know it. Okay? And that's the big difference, is the discipline of active learning will get you to know it. If you do like other classes on campus, or maybe this is how you did it in high school, you just kind of go over it. And I hear students say, well, I went over all the PowerPoints. Yeah, but you don't know it. Yeah, well, I went over it. You mean you glanced at it? Did you actually read it word for word? No, I read it. You know how little you guys remember from reading something? You know how little you guys will remember from me saying it? Hearing me talk, looking over the PowerPoints is passive, and you're only familiar with it. Well, you guys want to go into healthcare. Who here wants to get into a car accident, wake up in the ER, and everybody around you is only familiar with what they're doing? If you're in healthcare, it's because you know what you're doing. And it is the discipline that starts now. And the sooner you learn to be disciplined and active in your learning to know something, the easier all of this becomes. The more you try to put that lesson off, either one, you're going to take a lot longer to get there, or two, you're going to end up doing something else anyway. Does that make sense? All right, so lecture exam 2. In fact, I think I've loaded up the lecture exam study guides on Canvas 2 under files. And I think they're only going to come out one at a time. I can't remember. I've just been doing so much stuff on Canvas. But you will see that the lecture exam 2 study guide is the shortest. It's like 5.5 pages. You want to know how long the lecture exam 4 study guide is? 11 pages. It is twice that of lecture exam 2. Everybody understand how to pass this class? If you got to get one lecture exam with a 69 or higher, it's lecture exam 2. I've taught 3,000 students here at Allen Hancock College in anatomy. And the number of those that pass lecture exam 3 as their first lecture exam passed is somewhere around 40 out of 3,000. So everybody get lecture exam 2? Then the second thing you do to pass this class the first time, pass lecture exam 2, then kick ass in lab. Because lab is, and I'll repeat this afternoon, lab is only about 2 things. Can you visually recognize the structure? Can you spell it correctly? That's it. That's it for lab. Can you visually recognize the structure? Can you spell it correctly? Not only that, but lab exams that are 50 points each actually have 60 possible points. There's 10 points of extra credit on each one of those if you take it in when you're supposed to. Just wrap your mind around that. If you get, say, 90% of those 60 points, that's 54 points. You are 4 points over perfect. If you get 75% of the points on a lab exam, that's 45 points. That's actually an A, 75%. You do that, boom, pass lecture exam 2, score in the 50s, and it's easy to score in the 50s on a 50-point lab exam when you got 10 points of extra credit and it's only about visual recognition and spelling it correctly. That's how you pass this class the first time. Pass lecture exam 2, kick ass in lab. Is that a good hint? I'm just telling you how to do it. Okay, so I teach this class the way I would want it taught if I was a student in this class. And I love professors who are straightforward. And demanding. If they're not demanding, I don't improve as a student. But if they're demanding and they're not straightforward, they're a pain in the ass. So I'm going to be demanding. I'm going to require that you know things because I'm using anatomy to teach you how to be a health science student. I am going to require you to know it, but I'm going to at least be clear about what you need to know. Are we clear? Okay. Any questions? ERT, this class has been very intimidating to people, and students, the word on the street is that I'm a real hard ass, and well, I'm not a hard ass for me. I'm a hard ass for you. Again, demanding is the only way you're going to step it up. And there's going to be classes that you're going to need to step it up. Because the class in the nursing program, pharmacology, ain't nearly as straightforward as this. Okay? All right. All right, if you have your lecture PowerPoint, let's go ahead and get started on this. This is where I'm going to now hopefully not screw this up. It'll be really good too once I have the Bluetooth thing working, because then it's the same volume. Right now when I'm back here I got to shout, and when I come over here I better lower my voice, otherwise it's going to be really loud. Okay, everybody see that? And again, if you have a question, this is so much better than online education, because if you have any questions, just chime in, unmute yourself, and give me a good shout out, because right now, without headphones, I have to depend on the laptop speakers. Okay, but definitely stop me and ask questions as they come up. So I think I've covered everything about the course. Okay, you have a lecture exam 1 study guide in Canvas. And okay, this is how straightforward I am. If you look at the lecture exam 1 study guide and then look at the lecture PowerPoints, I'm going in order. I'm straightforward, I'm orderly and organized, because one of the things I want you guys to learn how to do with so much content is to organize it in your brain. Now, it doesn't matter how much I talk about how to be a health professional. If I don't show you, it doesn't matter what comes out of my mouth. This is why I start class on time. That's discipline. That's why I organize this content in an orderly fashion, because that's going to help you to actively know it. If I'm jumbling, I'm talking, and I'm going all these different directions and out of order, it's going to be so much more difficult to know it. Since I'm going to require you to know it, I better be orderly about it. Okay? All right. Now look at the tops of these slides. It actually has the symbols of an outline, because it is. That's one way to organize the content. So we're just going to talk about some biology basics, since this is a class in the biology department. And since this is about human anatomy, human beings actually belong in the biological world of taxonomy. But instead of just teaching you taxonomy, I'm going to use taxonomy to show you one of the tools that you can use for memory, and that's mnemonic. And when I was in my cellular biology class and we had to know all this stuff, we used the mnemonic like this: do kings play some chess on fine-grained sand? That doesn't make any sense except for the first letter actually stands for something real. Okay, so do actually stands for domain, and human beings belong into the domain eukaryote. Don't worry about this. I'm not going to ask a question off this slide on lecture exam 1. Okay, but you should be exposed to it so that you just know that we actually are tied to other living things on this planet. This domain basically means our cells have a true nucleus. We don't make our own food like plants. We actually have to go out, move around to eat our own food. That's animals. Well, our embryos develop around this thing called a notochord. So we belong to the phylum Chordata, and the vast majority of chordates have a backbone. Not all, but the vast majority have a backbone that develops right next to the notochord. So we're vertebrates with a backbone. We are warm-blooded. Females nurse young. So our class is Mammalia. Order is primates. We have opposable thumbs. If you take an anthropology class, that'll probably is a study of this family. But the scientific name for our species is Homo sapiens. Scientific name is genus and species. Okay? There's actually also subspecies, and believe it or not, all of us in this class are in Homo sapiens sapiens. All right, but that's a mnemonic that we use. Now, next to this slide, right cranial nerves. The only time that you would use mnemonic, and it says they're used sparingly, is when you don't have other ways of tying it to memorize it. It just stands alone, all by itself, like taxonomy. Well, then you got nothing left but a mnemonic. And in the cranial nerves, there's 12 pairs. It's on Old Olympus, towering tops, a fat-ass German viewed some hops. You just do that, and boom, 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 you can just write out the 12 cranial nerves. So you will use the mnemonic, but just don't use it that much. Students who use it too much end up remembering this and not this. And that don't do you any good. Does that make sense? Use it sparingly. All right, let's talk about anatomical organization. Maybe I'll write this on the whiteboard while you're looking at it, because this is actually a partial list on that figure. Let me just move this over. That's a partial list on that figure. And I'll have the camera go in on this closer at the end so you can see what the whiteboard has. On Thursday, we're going to actually talk about the atoms on the periodic table of elements. And there, you should know subatomic particles. By the way, for those of you who are planning on taking physiology, I would take at least intro to chemistry before taking physiology. We are the only college that I know of that offers physiology without a chemistry prereq. And it just is to your detriment. So the college really should require that. So then we got atoms. Then we have molecules. Then we have 4 biologically important macromolecules. Macro means big. And several of those will come together, form these functional structures within the cell. And those are called organelles. And this is on that structure there. It shows atoms and molecules and then organelles. Be careful of this. The last syllable is important. This is within a cell. And then all these different organelles will form the cell. And then several similar cells, either structural or functionally similar cells will form tissues. And there's only 4 basic types of tissues. 4. And this is the topic of week 1's lab. It's on the 4 tissues. Now, because tissues are made up of cells, we'll do a little bit of cells. And some of the cells have nuclei, and the nucleus of the cell is an organelle. So these three levels are what we'll actually be talking about in the afternoon this week. Okay? As I'm climbing up here, go ahead and grab your lecture schedule again and have that out. Several tissues will form organs. Several organs will work together to form an organ system. Now, organ systems generally are connected. You know, it's like your digestive system, right? You got starting with your mouth all the way to your poop chute. The whole thing is a continuous tube. Well, there are some exceptions. The endocrine system is not physically connected except by the bloodstream. But this is how classes like anatomy and physiology are organized. They're organized off of organ systems. So look at your lecture schedule. After we get past lecture exam 1, starting on lecture exam 2, we have the skeletal system, bones, muscle system, myology, nervous system, senses, endocrine system, cardiovascular. Those are all organ systems. So if you want to see a list of organ systems, you just look at any course syllabus for anatomy and physiology, and it's organized on organ systems. And then all the organ systems together make up the organism, which is you. Now, in the world of biology, there are stratas above that, populations and ecosystems and whatnot, but we'll just keep it right here. Just know that This Week in Lab is right there. Okay? All right. So that way you kind of have a framework for what we're discussing in lab this week. Looking the wrong computer. Okay. And we will also cover this stuff in lecture as well. As it says there, we'll talk about organelles next week in lecture. We'll actually start, I think, Thursday. Yeah. But we're going to be doing lecture exam 1, kind of moving up these levels. We'll talk about atoms and their importance to some of these organelles Thursday. All right. Now let's talk about anatomical position. This is standing upright, legs together, feet flat on the floor, face and palms forward. Okay, now look at those 3 bullets. Look over them. Do you think you know them? No, you don't know them. You're only familiar with them. Can I give you an example of active learning? This is, again, neurologically based. Right now, even though you're on camera, don't do this if you're not wearing pants. But if you're wearing pants, stand up. Just stand up right now. Get your asses off the chair and stand up. Those that are still seated, I know you're not wearing pants. Then you say it. Standing upright. You stand upright. Put your legs together. Put your feet flat on the floor. Put your palms and face forward. Except this time, you say it.
Okay.
Standing upright. Legs together. Feet flat on the floor. Palms and face forward. You do that twice and you know it. And you can go study something else. Go ahead and sit down. Why is that? When you're looking at 3 bullets, You're only using your eyes, which is only using your occipital lobes. And the occipital lobes is only going to carry so much to your hippocampus where long-term memory is stored. When you actually get up and stand up, you're using your frontal lobe, your primary motor cortex, by moving to it. That is connected to your hippocampus. When you actually say the words, standing upright, you're using your whole left cerebral lobe and the language centers. When you actually say it, your brain actually hears it. It's going into your ears to your temporal lobes. When you do that from several different cerebral lobes in your brain, all pouring into the hippocampus, it gets in that much faster, and you know it. Now you can study something else. Okay? Any questions? Because this is basically what discipline and active learning does to get you to know something, is you know it in less time. And my goal here, and hopefully it's your goal, is to get the most points per minute studying. Is anybody interested in that? The most points per minute studying. When you're in a nursing program or a dental hygiene program, you do not want to be this slow at learning things as you are now. You've got to be faster. This is how you get faster, is by active learning, understanding the neurology of your brain, and you make stuff pour into your hippocampus, your limbic system, where long-term memory is stored from multiple spots of your brain. You just look at that. I looked it over. Great. You got a little bit from your occipital lobe. You don't know it. Okay. Now let's ask the questions on the bottom. Why is anatomic position important? Can anybody guess? It is a frame of reference. It's a starting point. If you start there, now we can talk about directional terms. It is a starting point, a reference. It is relevant. For example, look at these figures on the slide. Are they not in anatomical position? Now we can talk about lateral, medial, superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, distal, proximal. Everybody got it? You start with anatomic position. Now these terms actually make sense so that you can say, doctor, that lesion on the skin is 5 millimeters, and it's about 6 centimeters from the midline on the right side. It is lateral by 6 centimeters. Now it actually makes sense. Everybody gets that? For these directional terms, these are not on the PowerPoint, but the hints are on the bottom. Learn these and match pairs. The more that your brain can group things, like in match pairs, the better, faster it gets into your long-term memory. And then get active. All right? You want to see how to get active? Stand up. Let's see. Stand up. Okay, here we go. Say it out loud. Superior.
Superior.
Inferior. Match pair. Anterior. Posterior. Lateral. Medial. And on the 4 extremities, distal, proximal. Superior. Inferior, anterior, posterior, lateral, medial, distal, proximal. You do that 2-3 times, boom, you know it. You can go on and study something else. Okay. All right, match pairs, be active. Yeah, your roommates, especially now that you're doing remote education at home or family, will probably think you're nuts. My friends thought I was nuts, but I kicked their asses in college, and I got my choice of dental schools. They didn't. Back in the day, this is bizarre, but back in the day, in my year at San Jose State, the 2 top pre-med, pre-dental students was me and another guy. And we just both went into dentistry. We did not go into medicine because neither one of us wanted to be woken up in the middle of the night. And of all things, he ended up buying an endodontic practice here in Santa Maria. So we were both in the same small town. It's crazy. Okay, body planes. Because our bodies are 3-dimensional, we have 3 body planes. Now, what I would do in learning body planes is I would tie it in mental connections to what we just learned on directional planes. Okay? So, for example, can you see me on the little screen? I won't make you guys get up. Can you see me on the little screen? On the top right? Sagittal plane divides the body in right and left portions. There can be all sorts of sagittal planes. There's only one mid-sagittal plane where the 2 portions are equal left and right. You got the transverse plane, divides the body into superior and inferior portions. You got the coronal plane that divides the body into anterior and posterior divisions. Okay? So again, I'm doing the same active learning because I don't want to waste time. I want to get this done so I can study the stuff that's coming up. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to do that motion. Transverse divides the body, superior, inferior portions. Coronal plane divides the body into anterior and posterior portions. Sagittal plane is going to divide the body into right and left portions. There's only one mid-sagittal plane. Okay? Everybody get that? Think, oh, that's silly, until you take lecture exam 1. For example, you guys listening? The thumb in anatomical position is blank to the wrist. If you know it, you can tell me. If you don't know it, you're going, oh, shit. Oh, and then, yeah, then it'll be something like this. A, distal. B, anterior. C, inferior. D, A and C. E, A, B, and C. That's why you got to know it. If you're familiar with it, you read that question, you're going, oh, what's A and C? A, distal. B, anterior. C, inferior. D, A and C. E, A, B, and C. The thumb is blank to the wrist. And the answer is, does anybody have an answer for that?
Distal and inferior?
It is D, A and C. It is distal and inferior. Everybody got it? Okay. Regions. When we talk about these regions, they are in the abdominal pelvic area. So the trunk from the anterior, okay? Abdominal pelvic regions and quadrants. Quadrants are easy. Upper right, lower right. Upper left, lower left. Everybody see that? That's intuitive. And when I was studying, anything that was intuitive, I wouldn't waste that much time studying. Now, abdominal pelvic regions is different. There's 9 of them instead of 4. So which one is more specific?
Regions.
That's right, regions. Okay, how many regions do you have to memorize?
9.
6. You got the 3 in the center. Take 3 on the side. It's same left and right. Everybody got it? Everybody see that? Even though there are 9 regions, you only got 6 you got to memorize. Because the column on the left is exactly as the column on the right. Hypochondrial, this seems kind of funny, but that is actually because it's under the cartilage portion of the ribs. Chondro is cartilage. Epigastric is around the stomach, umbilical is around your belly button, and hypogastric is below. That's the center column. On the side you have hypochondrial. Lumbar is lower trunk, and iliac is hip. So just learn the 6, the center of 3, one of the sides, and know that it's identical on the other side. Now you can see how the regions are more specific. All right. Now let's do body cavities. Now here I'm going to use organization as a memory tool, and you want to use this profusely. Whenever you can organize stuff, use it. Now, I have organized the content from the textbook. I distilled that down to the study guide, and then I distilled that even further into the PowerPoints. Basically, the study guide is just a list of topics, but the PowerPoint is showing you to what degree of detail you need to know it. The textbook can even in some areas have even more, but you don't have to know it to that level of detail. I'm telling you what you need to know at what level of details. Can I give you another big hint about succeeding in this class? Are those helpful at all if I give you hints about succeeding in this class?
Yes, they are.
98% of the points on lecture exams come from PowerPoint, and not just the PowerPoint, but things that are highlighted, underlined, or bolded. I am basically spending lecture giving away the answers to all the versions of my tests. Is that straightforward enough? The difference is you have to know it. I'm telling you what you need to know. It's not 100%, but it's upper 90s. All right, so the cavities are arranged in an outline. First, the posterior cavity. Some biologists like to use dorsal, but in the whale room here we got a shark, has a dorsal fin. Everybody should know from a dorsal fin what it means. It means posterior. Okay. There's only 2 subcavities, but they belong to the posterior cavity. Cranial cavity, and you should write brain next to cranial cavity. Cranial cavity holds the brain. That might be part of the 2% that's not highlighted, underlined, or bolded. And then you have the vertebral canal that holds the spinal cord. So next to A, write brain. Next to B, write spinal cord. But both of those belong in the posterior cavity. If you do not organize it like an outline, you can't answer that question. I taught this class at Cuesta. They used this textbook that had all these, just like a list of 12, and they did not group them and organize it like this. And students struggled much more so than my students on this. All right, now let's go to the anterior cavity. This is much more complex. There are 2 main portions, and it's separated by that brown line. That brown line is the diaphragm. So superior, start using these words, superior to the diaphragm is the thoracic cavity. Inferior to the diaphragm is the abdominal pelvic cavity. The abdominal pelvic cavity is where we get the regions and quadrants. Everybody see those terms now? Abdominal pelvic? But there are other things within those two main divisions. We have the pleural cavities and the thoracic cavities. Next to that, right lungs. And you have two of them, one on the left and one on the right. They are divided by a solid column of structures called the mediastinum. And at the very inferior end of the mediastinum is your heart, sitting in the pericardial cavity. So next to the pericardial cavity, right heart. Next to pleural cavities, right lungs. The abdominal pelvic cavity is really one cavity, but we have identified two subregions, the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. You really can't appreciate it in this figure. I have another figure coming up that shows it better. But man, if you could actually see it in a cadaver, you'll see why they were named. This abdominal cavity just looks all nice and smooth, and at the bottom, you have this skinny little cup that falls off at the bottom. That's the pelvic cavity. So this is from the thoracic cavity. Can anybody tell me up on the top there, what type of body plane is that picture?
Vertebral. Transverse?
That's a transverse plane. Very good. And you can see how the two pleural cavities are divided by the mediastinum. Again, a lot of times while I'm teaching, I'll ask questions. Sometimes I'll take the time to wait for an answer. Sometimes I won't. But it's basically how you should be studying. And that is with self-testing all the time. Self-testing is the only way that you know it. Okay? And this is, what plane is this picture from?
Cordial.
This is a coronal plane.
Coronal plane.
Yeah, coronal plane. So you can see the mediastinum there separating the two pleural cavities. This is also a transverse plane, but a little bit more inferior. You can see how the mediastinum is a solid column of structures that separate the two pleural cavities. But at the very inferior of the mediastinum is the heart in the pericardial cavity. So look at those indentations on the slide. This is intentional. This pericardial cavity belongs to this mediastinum. Mediastinum belongs to this thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity belongs to this anterior cavity. Do you see how the outline helps you to know what fits with what belongs to what? You have a blank list of 12. You don't know what belongs to what. And here's the picture I was telling you about. You could actually see here, they really did a good job of delineating the pelvic cavity. It's this narrow cup that's in the pelvic arch of your pelvic girdle, your two os coxae and the sacrum. Okay? Any questions? Now, the last thing I want to cover for today, because that's probably enough content for your very first anatomy class, is I want to talk about membranes in these cavities, okay? Go back a couple slides here to the, posterior cavity. And somewhere on the slide right, meninges. The membranes that line the posterior cavities are called meninges. And so if you hear someone has spinal meningitis, now you know what's inflamed. Itis, by the way, means inflammation of. So spinal meningitis is inflammation of the meninges in 1B on the slide. Spinal canal or vertebral canal. Okay, now as we get to the anterior cavity, at which this slide begins this discussion, you want to write mesothelium. This is posterior cavity. This is anterior cavity. All these terms on this slide have to do with the mesothelium in the anterior cavity. Now we have to go back to embryonic development to understand these terms. In embryonic development, your body cavities are there first, and then your organs grow into the body cavity, okay? And I gotta just tell you, you think about all these topics and you think, this doesn't have to do with dental hygiene. Why do I have to learn this? And the reason why is because everybody is different. Nobody is the same. And the only way you're going to have good judgment in clinical healthcare is if you have a broad base of understanding. And so I had to take a bunch of classes in which had to learn a bunch of stuff that seemed like I didn't need it, but it well-rounded me in a way that I used to practice dentistry, and I came down with rheumatoid arthritis, and that's why I had to retire. I retired in my 30s. But because of this broad base of education, I could take a second career. You could do other things in your fields. You don't always have to be in this one little box. And the more well-rounded you are in your education, the more options you'll have. All right. So if you have, because I did have to take classes in embryology, you have this little baby that's developing. Well, it doesn't look like a baby, it looks like a worm, but the body cavities are there first. And then the organs grow in while the body cavity is already lined with membrane, okay? And so if we imagine a kind of a relatively flat balloon as the body cavity, shove your fist into it, just like this picture. Your fist is the organ. Got it? When that happens, you draw that membrane with you on your fist. Now you have two sublayers of membrane, that which is actually stuck on the fist and that which is still lining the cavity wall. Does this make sense? Okay. The membrane that is stuck on the fist is called the visceral layer. So write that next to number 1. Stuck on the organ. In fact, because of the well-rounded education I have, I know the old name for organ was viscera. Just take off the L. The visceral layer is the one that's stuck on the organ. So if you look at this tall picture on the right, on the very bottom here is a VP, and that stands for visceral peritoneum, the lining in the abdominal pelvic cavity, and it's purple. It's stuck on the organs. It's got a layer stuck on the organs. That's visceral peritoneum. If you want to spell peritoneum, here it is right there. In kind of aqua color, lining the cavity wall, is PP, parietal peritoneum. Everybody get that? So this is in purple is the rubber on the fist. This in aqua color, kind of greenish, is the balloon that's lining the cavity wall. And all anterior cavities have this. All of them. So in the abdominal pelvic cavity, it's called peritoneum. You had the spelling right here. Peritoneum is lining in the abdominal pelvic cavity. Here in the pleural cavities, it's called pleura. And you can actually see if it's stuck on the lungs, it's visceral pleura. If it's lining the pleural cavity wall, it's parietal pleura. And the pleural cavity, which is in between, has a fixed volume of pleural fluid. If you get in a car wreck and break a rib, it is likely to puncture the parietal pleura. Then what happens? The surface tension of the liquid inside all your little air sacs, alveoli, will cause that lung to shrink away from the pleural cavity wall. That's called a pneumothorax or collapsed lung. We'll talk about that later. In the pericardial cavity, we also have visceral and parietal pericardium. Okay? We'll learn later in the semester that parietal pericardium is called the pericardial sac, and visceral pericardium is called epicardium, but don't worry about that now. Okay? You just worry about visceral pericardium and parietal pericardium right there. So this is the last slide. Got it all covered today, and then even though we got 10 more minutes, we'll break. Because that's evidence that I'm an introvert. When I'm done covering the information, I stop. I'm not going to keep talking till 10:50. All right. So if you notice everything that we covered so far, visceral and parietal peritoneum, visceral parietal pleura, visceral parietal pericardium. The last name of that name is named for the body cavity. It's like the family name. Everybody got that? Depending on which subcavity in the anterior cavity it's coming from. Abdominal pelvic, peritoneum. Pleural, pleura. Pericardial, pericardium. Then there's only two possible first names. If it's stuck on the organ, it's visceral. If it's lining the cavity wall, it's parietal. Everybody got it? When we get later in the semester talking about the digestive system, well, let me just put it this way. You have 20 feet of small intestines in your abdominal pelvic cavity. It's not a fist, it's a rope 20 feet long. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of excess visceral peritoneum when that fist is 20 feet long, and that fist that's 20 feet long will actually cause there to be a lot of excess visceral peritoneum in purple. Do you see that? It's actually like right here where the arrow is. That's not on the organ, but it got drawn off the peritoneal cavity wall because that fist became 20 feet. And when you got that much organ, you have mesentery. So mesentery, we'll talk about later on in the semester, is visceral peritoneum, purple, that's actually not on the organ. Like right here. Everybody see that? See my white arrow? See those purple lines? That's not on an organ. It got drawn into the cavity because the fist grew to 20 feet long. Does that make sense? Okay, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. I just wanted to make sure it's mentioned. So let's look at those examples on the bottom. Where do you find visceral peritoneum?
The abdominal pelvic cavity.
Yeah, you'd find it lining your guts, right? Your guts are in the abdominal pelvic cavity. If it's on the gut itself, it's visceral peritoneum. How about parietal pleura?
Lining the pleural cavity.
Lining the pleural cavity. How about the visceral? All the words are in the bullets, people. How about visceral pericardium?
Surrounding the heart.
Stuck on the heart. That's why it's called epicardium. Everybody got it? Was that enough information for the first day? We will continue on with the lecture exam PowerPoint on Thursday. even though we're 8 minutes early. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Miyahara. What is under mesothelium? The word's kind of covered.
Oh yeah, let me actually move the camera so you can see it, all right?
Oh, thank you.
Let me get off of this. This is the left bank of the whiteboard. Is that clear enough? And this will be in the recording if it comes out. If not, you might want to take a picture of it. Also, you know, there's rolling blackouts going on in California right now. Anything can happen on any class or lab. They might decide to shut the power off in Hancock.
Can we
So-
also see the right side of the board too? I couldn't see that when we were.
I'm going to move it over there right
Okay,
now.
cool.
But mesothelium, it says anterior cavity. Meninges are posterior cavity.
I have a question.
Okay.
Are we going to have lab today from 1 to 4, right?
Are we going to have what?
Lab?
If you are registered in 2169, you have lab at 1 o'clock today.
Oh,
If you're registered in 2168, it's 1 o'clock Thursday.
okay. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions? And this is what we're talking about in lab today, the 4 tissue types. We're also going to talk about visually recognizing structures and using this as your best friend. Because when I was in anatomy, I didn't have a limiting list. We had to learn everything in Grant's Atlas of Anatomy. You don't, because of your best friend. Okay? Any other questions? All right, first lecture. We got it done. I'm going to be in my office in about 15 minutes. Okay? All righty. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.